listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Well, hello and welcome back to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm your host, Val. So grateful that you're joining in today. Today, I would like to introduce you to my guest, Alia Stowers. I really appreciate Alia's transparency when we were talking before ever recording an episode of, hey, not sure what your vibe is, but we're not the most traditional family. And today's episode is going to focus on Alia and her family's unique story, partnering with her husband in raising their two sons, currently down south in the state of Missouri. I, of course, would invite you, if you have a motherhood story to share, to send me an email at info@themotherhoodexperience.com, and we'll try to get you on a future episode. Please be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Those links are always on our website in every episode description located in the show notes. And allow me to introduce you once again to Alia Stowers to share her unique mothering perspective. I would like to welcome Alia to the Motherhood Experience podcast. Welcome, Alia.
Hello. Good to be with you.
Yes. Will you let our audience know the ages of kids and the stage of motherhood you're in?
Yes, I have two boys who are 12 and 10. So that says a lot about what stage of motherhood. I guess I'm kind of in a stage of like consulting, kind of helping them figure out how to manage new things that are happening in their lives, maybe. I'm a consultant by trade as well, so maybe that's just me.
I love that. That is a very critical age, though, where things are starting to change a lot around them and their environments and stuff, and they could use that extra guidance of navigating it. You and your husband, when you got together, was family something you wanted to do right away? What were your views on that?
So George and I got married very young. I'm 45 now and he's 47. So we married very young. I was not quite 22. He was 23. And so we knew originally that we wanted to take our time having children because getting married young was not something that I had planned for or anticipated. So growing up, I didn't really think very much about mothering. I mean, we talked a lot about career in my house growing up. We just didn't talk about parenting. We really didn't talk about marriage much. And so when George and I got married, I think our parents encouraged us to wait 3 to 5 years, which was a pretty common recommendation at that time, at least. I don't know if people still say that to their kids now. And we're like, yeah, 3 to 5 years, sure. Because I didn't grow up thinking I didn't want to be a mom. I didn't grow up thinking I did want to be a mom. I think if someone had asked me, do you think you'll be a mother one day? I would have said yes. But I just didn't think about it much. And so I didn't think about my wedding either. Like people dream about their weddings. I never once thought about my wedding day. It's not really what we talked about growing up and what I anticipated primarily for my life. I grew up thinking more about career. And so we definitely were like, yeah, we'll wait 3 to 5 years. And then 3 to 5 years came and we were like, we still don't want to have kids. And so we just kind of pushed it down the line. We ended up starting to have children when we were 11 years into our marriage. And so we are older parents of our kids' age. But it's like, I always joke and say, like, we think you should want to have children before you have them. But I just think like we definitely are not the couple that like just defaults to it. And so we were very intentional. So we just kind of kept pushing it down the road. We were youth pastors. We helped to plant a church in South Dakota, which is how I know Sarah McKinley's been on your podcast before. And so we were in that stage of just kind of new marriage, young, still very young, away from our families. We'd moved away to do ministry. And I think we talked at the time a lot about how maybe our calling is more to like invest in other people's kids because we really take our ministry calling very seriously. And we just thought like not every couple needs to have kids. And so maybe we're one of the couples that just isn't going to have kids. So we never said we're not going to have kids. We just started preparing ourselves because we got a lot of comments of, you guys would make great parents. And like, people get concerned for you, I think, if you have been married for a little while and you don't have kids. Yeah. And we just kind of prepared ourselves to have responses for those comments. And we thought maybe for the rest of our lives, we'll have responses for those comments. And then I think it was probably somewhat related to my father passing away. Maybe there was a legacy, something that we both kind of caught. And so at the same time, thank God for that, we did start to think like, maybe we will have kids and maybe we're ready pretty soon to have kids. So we had our boys when I was 34 and 36, we had a miscarriage in between the two of them. So I've had 3 pregnancies. And then, like I said, now we're in our mid 40s. So we have always dreamed of adopting. internationally. So we may
Mm.
still do that, but it's kind of funny that we keep saying like we originally thought we'd adopt a baby and now then it was like a 3-year-old and now I'm like she's probably going to have to be like 8. So because we're getting older. So that's still to be determined. Otherwise, we're past the point where we want to have any more biological children. And so yeah, that's kind of the spectrum of our, kind of our relationship where we went from maybe we'll have kids one day to like do we even want to have kids to now we have kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so most for whatever reason people think we're younger than we are. I think this is probably part of the reason because our kids are younger than most people's kids in their 40s, and a lot of times our friends have been either they're in such a different life stage than us because their kids are grown and out of the house at our age, or we've ended up being friends with people who are, at least 5 to 7 years younger than us because their
Yeah.
kids are the same age as our kids. And that by itself has kind of been an interesting dynamic to manage.
Yeah. Do you feel like in that you're kind of a mentor to other parents who have children your age while still learning this parenting thing alongside of them?
I think that we have, because we've been pastors for so long and we worked with kids even when we were teenagers, we sort of ministered to other teenagers. And so I think we always have had a little bit more of a mentoring relationship with most of our friends for one reason or another. It's either because we're older or our marriage. I mean, we've been married almost 24 years. So again, most people who have a 12 and a 10-year-old, maybe they've been married for 10 years less than we have. So yes, that has always made it a little bit difficult for us to have like purely mutual relationships with a lot of our friends. And we do have friends who are younger than us whose kids are older. And because we were youth pastors for so long and really still are, if you're talking about like my husband, his nature is he's a youth pastor, but he's just not always like traditionally in that role. We've seen so many kids grow up, right? And we have sort of advised parents for many years on what their kids were going through, but there's no question that it's very different when it's your children. So on the one hand, we already know a lot of like the lessons we're telling ourselves, like don't take that too seriously, they're going to grow out of that and things like that. But on the other hand, like going through it ourselves, we are often looking to parents whose kids are older than ours to say like, did you deal with bullying in school, and how did you manage these complex conversations that at 12 and 10 they're starting to want to have. And also then they'll turn around and be like, and how did you deal with this when you were married for, let's say, 18 years? Like what types of things were you experiencing? And so I think the closest thing that we've been able to do to develop a lot of really mutual friendships is sort of like advising each other in opposite directions. Your kids are older than my kids. I need advice. Also, your marriage is older than my marriage. So now why don't you give me advice? And it's been a really interesting challenge to navigate, particularly as when you are in the role as, say, mentors, or like if people view you as a pastor, then a lot of times they're pursuing, sort of mentoring from you anyway. And in many
Right.
cases, they have more knowledge than you, or they're further along in a certain area. We always appreciated parents who understood that kids need a lot of healthy inputs into their lives, and that when they become teenagers, they are trying to acculturate. They just have to acculturate outside of their family. So a lot of times they listen to other people more than they listen to their parents. That's just part of growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And we were some of those people. For years, we would say to parents like, hey, that doesn't mean they don't love you anymore. If you say the same thing and then I say it next week, they're going to hear it when I say it. They're not going to hear it when you say it. I know that's frustrating. So again, like a lot of the lessons that we're having to still tell them to ourselves and remind and tell other people like, hey, tell me what I told you 15 years ago. But we kind of know the lessons a lot. We realize like our kids they need a lot of outside relationships now. And so we are definitely sort of regularly turning to people that they've identified in their lives, kind of like aunts and uncles, that we are like, hey, can you take this one from here? And so like we have a leg up on a few lessons like that, but it doesn't make it any easier when it's like your kid who like gets bullied and you're like, okay, he's going to make it through this. And we wanted to build resiliency, but like, oh my gosh, I just want to punch that other kid in the face. You know what I mean? Like you still kind of go through all the same things. It's like when we had our first kid, we were 34 or 30. I might've been 35 when I gave birth to him. And I didn't want to be like a classic first time mom who like freaked out about everything. And so I was very careful about that. But at the same time, I was a first time mom and I was kind of freaking out about everything. So, there's only so much of that you can do where you're like, I want to be better at this than I pictured. But then you're still you. You're still like, we still have an almost teenager.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you go.
I love that transparency because I feel like you put a voice to a lot of struggles that other moms don't want to admit, or maybe weren't even realizing they were having at the time. And so when you became pregnant for the first time and you realized, okay, we're doing this now, we're starting a family after years of, not being sure if that was in the cards for us or not. what was the shift like? I think you said 11 years you had been married before you had kids, and that's a that's a long precious time of just the two of you. So what was the transition like once you became pregnant to, okay, now it's not just going to be us as husband and wife doing these things that we have enjoyed and appreciated on our own for the last 11 years. Now we're starting a family. What was that transition like?
I would say we were fortunate. I think a lot of people wouldn't care so much about this, but we really chose the timing. And we were
Hmm.
able to. So I didn't get pregnant by accident at any point. We were pretty intentional about birth control. To me, it was a big deal. When we decide to have kids, it's a big deal. And it's not just because it's a big deal for everybody, but for a woman, the implications of having children are just different. And so I knew that for my career, for my free time, for travel, things that were important to me, like this is going to have a different impact on me than my husband. I wanted to breastfeed for a nice long time. I ended up getting my first kiddo to 21 months and then the second one to 24 months. But when you work full time, that's a huge commitment. So I was really not away from them, right? So like I was very aware before we got pregnant. And I almost, in a sense, like I feel like we grieved a lot of that stuff beforehand. And
Yeah.
there wasn't anything that surprised us. The things that surprised us were things like, oh, this is how it feels to be pregnant. Or like, oh, this is what they meant by transition. Okay, like this is the first time I've ever experienced it. But the grieving, the like letting go and loss and all of that, I feel like we were very careful to get pregnant when we knew we were ready. So having lived for so long without kids, we were very like, now we're ready to do the kid thing. And for what it's worth, we even said to each other, like, we can't blame anything on like if we get mad at like I can't sleep at night and this baby keeps waking me up stuff, really we chose to have them. So whereas people who get pregnant by accident or this is thrust upon them for one reason or another, like say through sexual assault or things like that, I can't relate to that because we were very intentional about when we got pregnant and we had already traveled quite a bit and we had done a lot of the things that people might almost like resent being a parent for. But it was definitely different. I just think that what we always committed to each other and what is one of my priorities too in my life is to really enjoy what you're in and to try not to focus too much on. I mean, I have a tendency to be very melancholy and like and miss, like, oh, but man, it was so nice when it was nice like before my body changed, or it was so nice when I was a teenager and I could eat anything. Like my tendency is to go that direction, but I very consciously make myself not do that. Like, hey, Alia, you are sleep deprived and it's really hard having a baby and you're never sure what that symptom is that they seem to have. But you wanted to have a baby and he's never going to be a baby again. And so I think we did a pretty good job of like enjoying each of the phases. And still now with a 12 and a 10-year-old, like I miss so many things. I'm not going to have another biological child. And so there are a lot of things I missed. I'm like, I every now and then think very like, sentimentally about like being pregnant or having this little snuggly baby and like looking into a baby's face and you can see you and your husband in their face and in their, whereas of course, if you adopt, like that's not necessarily the same thing, but you're seeing your personality coming out in this kid. And we're in very different phases now, but my priority as a mom is consistently is enjoy what's in front of you right now. Try not to think too much about what you're missing and try not to think too much about like, what the heck are we going to do when he's driving and all of that. But just because it moves so fast, and granted, being in our mid 30s when we had our kids, like I cannot, if I had a quarter for every time people said, it goes really fast. Like you're going to blink and they're going to be older, right? This is like, we love to say this to each other. So I was like, I'm getting the lesson. Like I got the lesson. It's going to go fast and try to enjoy it as you go. I also refuse to live. And granted, my life is maybe different from a lot of other moms and a lot of moms who might be listening to this podcast. I own my own business. I travel at least once a month, generally for my business. My husband is a stay-at-home dad. So I feel like maybe my day-to-day priorities might be a little bit different than many other moms, but I refuse to do this whole thing that moms tend to do where they like beat themselves up and they don't think they're good enough at it. And it really struck me like on Mother's Day, you always see these things like there's this like deep need to like encourage moms because there's maybe a tendency or a societal pressure to like think about all the ways you're sucking or you're failing. And I just won't do that. I'm just like, listen, I know I'm not a perfect parent. I can grow every day. I'm getting better maybe at it. But like, as soon as you get better, then they change phases. And then you're like, well, there went that lesson I just learned that I thought I was going to be able to apply. Like now they're not even, now they don't play with toys anymore. They just want like video games or gift cards, right? Like we're now in that phase. So I refuse. Like, I don't feel like I need a significant amount of encouragement as a mom because I don't feel like I think too much about all the things I'm doing wrong as a mom. I apologize quickly and we move on. And then I have a lot of exciting things in my life that make me think like I wasn't too screwed up, but like I'm a Gen Xer. our parents like they didn't even know where we were. Like they didn't even know where we were. My parents didn't know I was
True.
dating older guys. They didn't know anything that was happening in my life. There were 5 of us. We were all close in age, and they were just lucky that like, we came home every night. And sometimes I just think like channel a little bit of that, and like remember, kids are resilient. If you love them and you're doing your part, and I think it is important to apologize. I think it is important to be honest and humble and transparent with your kids. But like if you're doing those things, like sometimes that's the best you can do. I'm just not going to wonder every day at the end of the day, like, how many different ways did I fail, or did I miss an opportunity? Or it's just not, it moves too fast,
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't even remember your original question, but yeah.
I don't either, but I really appreciated that answer and I enjoyed going along with you on it. I do want to unpack though, because you mentioned working full time, owning your own business. Your husband is a stay at home dad. And I think that that is a unique situation. You don't hear a lot of that, at least not here in South Dakota for sure. What do you believe the impact that has on your boys to spend so much time with their dad like that?
So when the kids were little, George was they're in school now outside of the house. So he did homeschool them for 2 years. So for a while there, what you just said, like they spent so much time with him. Now, because they're gone to school, they will sometimes still spend more time with him than me, because if I'm traveling, then of course I'm not here at all. Otherwise, if I'm home, we probably spend equal time with the kids. And I do have a priority that when I'm home, I'm really home.
Yeah.
I work, so I'm not always available, but I work mostly during the day when I'm home. So their experience is almost like we're both stay-at-home parents, except when I'm gone. So they have the benefit of just having a lot of time and a lot of quality time with us. And one of the other things too about our values is that we don't keep our kids very busy. We never put them in a lot of activities. They have 1 or 2 activities at any time, but a lot of our activities are a little bit more, they're not as structured. And so like, for instance, one of our kids is doing boxing, but really we can go as many times a week as we want. It's not the same as being like on a softball team where you have to go to certain practices. And I'm not saying that's not good or that we wouldn't have done that, but our kids just didn't gravitate towards those activities. So we have a lot of time with our kids. We still have tons of quality time pretty much every day after school. It's a lot less. We miss the days when they were home all the time with us, and they miss it too sometimes, but we do get a lot of time with them. So it's not even like I work till 5 and then I have to drive home for half an hour and then it's dinner time, like a lot of families would experience, either with the mom or with the dad, either way.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, our kids are kind of spoiled. We tell them a lot, like, you get a lot of time with us. If that's what you want, you're spoiled. If that's not what you want, then you're stuck. But as far as like, so my husband is I don't know that he's that unique in the sense that everybody's nuanced, right? And me too. I have a lot of masculine characteristics. Like I'm very direct and decisive and things like that. But I have a lot of nuance to me, right? So my husband, who like rides a motorcycle and can shoot a gun and has a big old huge tattoo covering his back and things like this that are considered pretty masculine. He's also like, he loves to bake and he's the cook in the family and he sews things if they come off the clothes. And he is the one that the kids go to if they're hurt, because he's much more nurturing by nature than I am. So maybe it helps to know he's not the type of man, because there are probably more men these days than 10 years ago who stay at home, but he's not like I can't find a job right now, so I'm going to stay at home. Like he loves being at home. He loves that role and he fits it very, very well. And it's his, like for a while he would call it like, this is my calling, just like a mom might, right? Just like a mom might. So because of that, that also means that they've gotten different things from being home with him, right? So they've had some skill building around things like using some power tools, and they've had some skill building around things like baking cupcakes. And maybe not every mom or dad would bring both those types of things to the table. So I think our kids' experience is going to be like pretty unique to like many kids who have had either their mom or their dad staying home with them, because George is so unique. But the main thing is like we both have incredible parents. Both of my parents have passed away. His father has passed away, but we grew up with wonderful parents who were still married at the time that they died, which is pretty actually unique for our generation these days. And yet, like he said, like a lot of times, like he knew that his dad loved him, but they didn't talk about it much and stuff, right? George has always had this value of like, every day I will tell my kids that I love them. And we still do bedtime with them where we snuggle, one of us, we switch off, one of us snuggles and like really for a while and talks through the day and has these moments of like, vulnerability with the kids. And so things like that, like he has always said, the reason that I'm here so much is because you're worth that and you're important to me. And so I don't know really, I don't have not spent a lot of time thinking about the difference between a kid getting that from their dad and them getting that from their mom. Because honestly, we just don't think much in our family about the differences between us because one of us is a woman, one of us is a man. It's just what a kid gets when a parent can be sort of available to them so often, particularly when they're still at home, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's been beautiful. I mean, I'm so thankful that we did it that way. I also really appreciate people who don't. And now our kids are in school outside of the home, and we love this too. So I think the foundation for him, like to be home with them and to know that they would never have to wonder how he feels about them. And then I think he really enjoyed just building skills in them that, like I said, a lot of young kids may like. Our 10-year-old is, and I'm not saying this is unique just because my husband was at home, but our 10-year-old is like, for Christmas, he asked for a machete set and got it. And we go out like on trails and stuff, and he's like highly skilled with knives. I mean, I don't mean he throws them and like can assassinate somebody, but like he's never cut himself. He was in Cub Scouts for a while and they did like knife safety. But some of this stuff, like when we noticed young that he was interested in being outside a lot, and like he would cry over like a killed mosquito. So he's not a hunter type. He's an outdoorsy type and a conservationist really by nature. And George was able to teach him things really young that like maybe a lot of kids learn when they're much older. So I think it's just been so beautiful to watch them. Like I don't think they could ever possibly wonder how much he loves them or how valuable they are to him. I don't see that they wonder that about me either. And so that's been really nice to kind of be able to like, for whatever reason, they don't seem to question or wonder about my love for them and my investment in them, but they can see that it's different. And I'll just tell you like a really brief story that shows you how differently our kids maybe view the world, partially because of our modeling this like non-traditional. We didn't set out to do it. It's just it's just who we are.
Yeah.
My oldest son, he goes to a private school. It's not a Christian school, but it's a private school. And his teacher he came home one day, like early on in the school year, and was, this is a new school. We've moved across the country. This is it's a new school for us. So he came home and he was like, I think Mr. Lee is just like really, he has much like more conservative values than I'm used to, or traditional values is probably even more accurate. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, today he said, or actually this had been like a week ago. He said, he made this comment that kind of bothered me a little bit. He said something like, well, you know how your dad goes to work every day. And he kind of looked at Naeem, and he was just trying to make a point. Okay, let's just be clear. He was getting to some point. And Naeem was like, actually, my mom works every day. My dad's at home. And he was like, well, in a normal family, blah, blah, blah. And went on for what he was saying. And Naeem told me about it. I said, what about it bothered you? And he said that word normal bothered me a little bit. And so we talked about it a little bit. And I said, we know Mr. Lee, he is more traditional than we are. But, he probably meant like more commonly your dad would, right? I probably didn't mean normal, but yeah, it really stinks when someone suggests that the way your family works isn't normal, because it's very normal to us. So Naeem is also he's just taken on some of my characteristics of advocacy. He thinks a lot about how women are treated and girls are treated because he sees me out in the business world. And so because of the experiences that he's had with his dad and with me, him in particular, because he's a bit older, he's having these really complex observations of how the world works. And he's more of like a female advocate than we intentionally made him, because I think just, he wants to value what his dad has brought to his life. He wants to value what I brought to it. And so he just doesn't see like, why is it such a big deal which parent it is and stuff. So, I mean, like, these are things that you just can't not kind of grow up, I think, thinking some of those things when you have such sort of non-traditional parents. And my father is from India. He's a Muslim. I mean, he's passed away, but growing up in that household too, like similarly, like I grew up with a value on different cultures, with an openness to like talk to people of different religions, even though I'm Christian. Like I grew up with some things too, that like a love for travel, a love for experiencing different foods, that like I almost like could not have grown up in that family and not learned some of those or been open to some of those things. And it's, I think it's every family, like, however you're representing the world to your kids, there's some amount of just, that's their norm. So to answer your question about like, what has it done for our kids to have their dad home so much? I think it's really shifted their norms in a way that, of course, we consider to be incredibly healthy. Others may disagree, of course.
Yeah. I want to touch back on, you talked about loving travel, and I know that you travel some for work. Do you have the opportunity to travel as a family often? And do your boys like to travel as well?
The boys love to travel. So one of the decisions that we made when our kids were really young is when they were very little, we decided not to vaccinate them we didn't vaccinate them for anything at that time. And we knew that we were going to keep them home for a few years, homeschooling them. Then COVID hit, so we weren't traveling. And so we have, again, personal decision. We have since then caught up on those vaccines because they're a little bit older now and they seem to have this super, super strong immune systems. And so there was a period, there was like, okay, we don't really feel comfortable taking them all to all the parts of the world when they haven't had some of these vaccines. And then COVID hit, and we were like, we're not going to be traveling all over the world during COVID. And so their travel, like international travel experience, was sort of just delayed beyond what we would have normally wanted to do. In fact, it's kind of funny, but I remember at the beginning of 2020, I was like, this is the year we're going to like take the kids out of the country. And then COVID hit. So their experience going out of the country is still very, very limited. We went to India last year around Christmas time and England, and we've done a couple of things together as a family, but really they've done a little bit more travel within the country just due to the way that, history has landed on their lives. They do love to travel and they do want to travel a lot. So they have that bug. It's probably just a value that we've always had that we passed on to them. My husband didn't grow up traveling, but my family, first of all, my father's an immigrant, which just for his life, that meant that he was going back and forth. He took us back and forth. Even as babies, we traveled to India, but he also was just a world traveler. So my mom, who was a farm girl from North Alabama and married him at 19, had never been anywhere, but through their lives, up until he passed away, they had been to like 60 something countries. So that was a value that was passed very, very early on to me. And then my husband loved that about my family. And so he was like, I really haven't been anywhere, but I can't wait to travel more. So George and I have gone a few more places than the kids have. I have traveled to a lot more places than my family has. Outside of the country. I'm more interested in international travel. So I'm probably not being very clear here because we've gone to a lot of places within the country. So going to the Taj Mahal, for instance, we came back with the kids saying, what are the other 7 wonders of the world? And like, maybe we should go to all of them. So now we're saying like, as a family, it'll be really nice to like hit all of the 7 ancient wonders of the world together, which is, we won't be able to get to all of them before they graduate high school because we have other trips we want to do too. And so it's really nice because like our friends, Dallas and Sarah, their kids are adults now. I think they're all right now, like just recently all out of the house, but they still travel together. And after we were out of the home, my parents and we still travel together out of the country. So this is really kind of nice because I think we've just set ourselves up to sort of guarantee that once they're, old enough to be creating their own lives, that they'll still travel with us because we still have like 2 more of those. So yes, we've kind of created this culture now of travel in our household. But like last year we moved here to Missouri. And so we didn't go out of the country. We're still trying to decide what those next few trips will be. But it's to us, travel is about culture. So yeah. To me, that's the biggest value in it is yes, you want to experience food and you want to see the sights and everything, but it's about experiencing other cultures. And so one of the funny things that happened, so again, my kids are a quarter Indian. They look very white. If you look at the picture, they've definitely they definitely have more of their dads. And I'm half white, half Indian. So, but they really resonate with their Indian quarter. So, and we cook it, my husband cooks Indian food a couple times a week usually. And we've tried to really expose them to their Indian heritage. So we went to India, we were looking at all of these fortresses and palaces and, things. And that story is the same everywhere. I mean, obviously everybody knows India was colonized by England. And so the story is pretty much the same as it is in most colonized areas, which is like, this ceiling used to be covered with gold, but the British took it out when they came. These are facts. And so, anyway, but we were flying back through England on our way back home. And so we extended the trip and we stayed for like one night. We did everything you can do in England in like 12 hours. And it was just like we hit another country while we were gone. But I didn't do the math. It didn't occur to me that we were going to England right after India. So we get to England, we're looking at like the crown jewels and stuff. And my youngest son was like, but we don't like them, right? Like meaning the British. He was like, we don't like them, right? Because like they took all that stuff from India and like India's our place and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, it hadn't even occurred to me that like he would make that, I don't know, that like these 2 trips being right next to each other would have that impact on him. And so we had this conversation where I was like, well, those are people from a long time ago and it's not the people who are here now and stuff. And he was like, so they gave it all back? And I was like, well, no, they didn't give it back. It's just this really, really great conversation about imperialism and colonialism. And we have I would say very sophisticated conversations about race and ethnicity and culture and those things that I adore. And so for me, the travel kind of triggers those conversations. And to me, that's the more important part. We do want to, and it's like adopting. We may do it, and it may just not end up being what happens in our lives. But we're looking into potentially like moving abroad for a couple of years while the kids still live at home, because living in another culture and experiencing other ways of approaching life, to us, that's an incredibly valuable experience to give them. And so if my international business picks up enough, then that is something that we would like to do to kind of continue the track that we're on. And if we moved, say, to Europe or even anywhere near Europe, we would, like get on a train and hit several countries and kind of pick up a few words from each. We would try to do like a lot of exposure especially during those couple of years abroad.
Yeah, that is a question I was going to ask you about, kind of like establishing roots. With loving to travel so much, I would expect someone would move, we'll just say several times over the course of their lives. So you kind of answered that a little bit with your plan of possibly moving abroad, but what is it like when you do move to a new area? Are you looking to establish roots? Are you looking to just sit there for a time? Are you looking to experience what you can? Like, what is the process of, I guess, in contrast to some people, when they move, they settle, that's where they want their grandkids to come visit them. You know what I'm saying? What does that look like for you? Are you excited to move every so often? Do you get restless when you are in a place for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, it may be important to mention that I went to way back before I ended up getting my master's in more of a business field, but my bachelor's is in missions. So I went to Bible college and got a missions degree. And I think this is unique to me. Like, I always saw myself either moving every several years as a missionary or living somewhere different. So I think there's in my brain, like, that's open, that my
Yeah.
heart is just open to moving and to being wherever God calls us. When we came to South Dakota originally to help plant a church, we didn't know if we'd stay for 3 years or 7 years or 20 years. And we've kind of always had that perspective of like, how long will God have us in this place? And for however long we're in this place, we're really fully committed. For instance, the other day I often remember, especially now, because we grew up in South Alabama, and then we lived there for 4 years until this summer. And then we've moved back here to Missouri. So we had not lived in Alabama since we were teenagers, but we've also lived in South Dakota. So you just think climate and temperature and all that's so different. And when we lived in Alabama, there came a point where like, it's too hot. It's too hot. Kids hadn't taken to the beach. I was like, we can move somewhere else. Whenever we're ready, we could go somewhere else. We don't need to be
Yeah.
here. And at that point, I'm like, how did we live in South Dakota where it snows so much and it's so cold? And like, how did we do that? But for those 5 years in South Dakota, we loved it. It's like, be where you are when you're there. And we
Right.
never thought it was too much snow. And we never thought, I don't remember ever, it was magical, because we'd grown up in Alabama. And then being in Alabama, we were like, hey, we can see the ocean all the time. Like, this is beautiful, and let's enjoy it while we're here. We could always sense when we got a little bit restless or when we felt like the grace was kind of lifting, that it's probably time to go somewhere else. But I think because George and I, our first priority was ministry and just go where God tells us, we assumed we'd move every now and then. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't feel like we've moved that much. I mean, since we had our kids here in Missouri. And then we moved to Alabama 4.5 years ago. And then we were there for 4 years, and we've moved back to the exact same city. So to some degree, that gave some roots, right? Like, they already know some people here. They recall the snow. We don't get a lot of snow here, but like, they recall the cold. They like the cold. So for us, again, maybe that's unique that we ended up coming back to a place we had lived before. So they've really only lived in two places. Before we had kids, George and I would have moved. We probably would have moved every 2 years if we just really felt like God told us to. I never felt the need to put down roots. It is harder, I think, when you have kids. Like, you really do wonder, like, can they make friends? So I think, again, maybe this is just the cultural upbringing that I had, especially with parents that were of two different religions. Like, you just have to some degree, you have to start to say to yourself, like, that's not what I would prefer, or that's not, you know what I mean? So especially living in South Dakota, like, there's so many families that they're always going to live there. And that depth of community and roots is beautiful. And I know, like, my family in Alabama, many of them, they wouldn't even consider moving to another city when they have kids. You know what I mean? They're going to go back home. It was never our style, because again, you have to remember that my father came from the other side of the earth and settled here. So like, it was never my thought that like, I'm going to go back home and stay there. And I didn't care for Alabama. I didn't care for the culture. Nothing against Alabama. It just wasn't a fit for me. So I always thought we want them to have some space to grow, but to grow where they are, but also to always be open. So I think we're pretty much rooted here in Missouri for the rest of their high school years, and that's kind of, this is like our compromise, is like, we're not going to keep bouncing around, but if we go somewhere for a couple of years to live abroad, we'll probably keep our house, we'll kind of keep our roots here, but sort of almost be sort of sent for a short period of time and then come back. And that's probably for us a good balance of roots and
Yeah.
wings.
Yeah.
It's harder, like when I think about my children, because I'll say to them like, "Hey, you can just live right down the street," or you know what, it would be so fun if like you get married one day and you just like, you can live in our house forever, ha ha, like, and they're like, "Oh, mom," but I'm like, I don't want them to go away. At the same time, my parents were like, "Go see the world and like go to college in some other state," and we never lived near my parents, and that is sad for me, of course, now that they've passed away. But it's also just the way I'm built. So I want them to, like, if you want to live in France, you should go live in France, and we'll come see you. So I think it's so hard to know when you're a parent, because you want to, that every kid has a different, like, let's just call it a calling, but like, it just means their preferences and what they want out of life. And I just really want them to be free to make that choice. I would never want them to feel uncomfortable, like, let's say, living with us until they're 22 or coming back home later in life or whatever. I also don't want them to think they must do that. So I think we're a really weird family, because George's family still all lives in the same town that he grew up in, and that's where we lived for 4 years, in Alabama. And I think that's pretty cool. And then my
Hmm.
sisters live all over the country, and our parents are gone. And we only see each other as a full family every 2 years. And it's also kind of cool that we all felt we could go do what we wanted to do, and we're finding a way to make that work as a family. So I think that watching how George and I are trying to figure out, like, what is the balance of those two things? And also, what do our kids need, which might be different from what each of us needed? Definitely, it's like TBD. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, ask me in 4 years how it went, because we don't have a clue what we're doing, which is probably the most freeing thing that you can say as a parent. And I'm okay with it, because it's like all an adventure. And I
Right.
honestly, I think we see our relationship with God as an adventure. So to me, it's like, this is just an extension of that. So, like, I don't know exactly, but I think it'll be really fun to figure it out together.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say motherhood has taught you or shown you or surprised you with over the last 12 years?
I mean, it's taught me a lot of things. I couldn't even begin to list the things I've learned. Maybe I'm always going to say that, like, I like that we did it the way we did it, because I think it was the right fit for us to wait. Because I feel like in my 30s, I was so much more settled in who I was. And people say, like, in your 20s you don't know who you are. In your 30s, you start to figure out who you are. In your 40s, you start to actually be able to be who you are. And then, of course,
Mm.
the next couple of decades, I'm sure, are even better. And so for us, being so, like, pretty much very mature in our marriage. I mean, we went through some hard things, like all marriages do. And I don't know how people do that when they also have kids, because we were able to really dig into some marriage counseling and really work through some things in our marriage in those first 10 years. But because we were so settled into our partnership, which is really definitely what our marriage is, it's all I've ever wanted out of marriage, really. And I think George and I were able to really work through our partnership so well, and then we were prepared for what came in parenting to the degree that you can be, that I'm glad we did it the way we did, even though there are some specific downsides to, like, being an older parent, and how old we're going to be when they graduate high school, and how old we're going to be when they get married and have kids and stuff. I probably, the thing that it's taught me more than anything is kind of something that I've alluded to, which is just enjoy, like, there's no point in regretting or going back and thinking. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen some young, like, 25-year-old woman who's pregnant, and I'm like, well, your body's probably going to bounce back. My body didn't bounce back. I'm like, and even the second one was so much harder than the first one, and there was only 2 years difference between the two. And there's a place for being like, I so respect the way you're doing that. It's like my friend Sarah McKinley, she has her home is beautiful, and she knows, she, like, decorating comes pretty naturally to her. I think she just has an aesthetic eye. She's definitely decorating her home for the way she likes it to look. And it's never been my style, but I'm like, wow, I love your home. But like, I would not even think to decorate my home that way, not just because it's not my style, but because you can so appreciate the way someone else does something and not want it for you. And
Mm.
so I like the ability to look out at the world and be like, wow, that's really cool the way they're doing that. And hey, that's really kind of interesting the way that they've chosen to do that. And still happy and blessed and grateful for the way that we are doing things. And we do adjust a lot, because we both are pretty flexible people. So we're constantly trying, like, a new chore type thing, or, we're doing these brain gigs now, like home economy, and, like, maybe in a year we won't have stuck with it. I used to feel really guilty about, like, we don't have a chore chart. Are we failing our kids because we're not really asking them? And also, like, are they responsible enough to get up and help when we ask them to come help with it? Like, there were so many things I thought, like, there's so many great tools out there and I can't use them all. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, I don't know if we're doing this, like, this is a great resource and we're not really can't fully integrate it. And also my husband, who's a stay-at-home parent, is not a deeply disciplined, structured person. So he's always needed to have some freedom to do things his own way. But I'm like, I'm a learner and I'm always like, but if you read this book, like, I think that, this, but like, it's going to be the way it's going to be. And so I think now, like, being willing to kind of take some pieces and just make them our own, being willing to try a resource, maybe it lasts for 3 months, but instead of saying, wow, we really didn't stick with that, we're just like, what did we take away from it? Because the chore charts and the family devotionals every night that some people do stuff, man, I think those things are amazing, but they're not us. And our kids are still doing pretty well. Like, are they going to have something to go through inner healing about one day? Absolutely. Also, are they really blessed because we're pretty great parents? Absolutely. So, I mean, I would say that's probably the thing I love the most about being a parent is it's an adventure. It's fun. We goof off. When they were little, we used to do dance parties every night just because they loved to do them. And it wasn't like, you should do dance parties. And it was just like a thing that happened. I love that, but we don't really do dance parties now that they're the age they are, but we still laugh together so much and we really just have fun together. And, every now and then for us, our tendency is like, we might tolerate behavior that others would consider disrespectful. Sometimes we're like, okay, maybe we need to like form a stronger boundary there because maybe they are starting to like talk to us the way they talk to friends and we're not the same as their friend. That's our tendency, where some people might go a little bit more the other way. But the fact that they enjoy being with us, like, to me, that's the most important thing, because the connections that we're forming with them as they go into those adolescent years and they're like full-fledged puberty, and they don't really want to listen to us because they're acculturating. They have to listen to their peers. That's like part of being part of a broader tribe. But as long as they know we're still there and that we accept them no matter what, and everybody has different perspectives on these things, but I just always wanted them to know that no matter what, they are accepted, loved, welcome, and that we'll work through anything that they struggle with. We'll work through it together. And so, like, these moments of just goofiness together, or sometimes we have these arguments and then it's like, all right, buddy, let's talk about it. And then we're at a place where we're apologizing to each other. Or my oldest he's super, super stubborn. So he tends towards defiance. And I'm also really stubborn and very defiant. Like, I'm a disruptor. And that's what I do with my business. And and so I love it about him, but I'm also like, it's very hard to parent.
Yeah.
And we just do-overs are a huge thing for the two of us. At this point, like, the idea that at any point you can say, can we have a do-over? And we immediately start from scratch. And he always does apologize for any disrespectful language later, but that's not really immediately expected in the do-over. The do-over is just like, we immediately change our tone, we change our orientation. I'll say, like, so do you want some snuggles? And he'll immediately say, like, yes. And then we're able to kind of melt into the addressing the conflict. But the idea that at any point you can have a do-over for me, and the thing that it's taught me is like some emotional flexibility, because to immediately have to like let go of that frustration and just be like, oh, you're asking for me now. You were pushing me away, but now you're asking for me. I know that I need to have that flexibility for the teenage years that are coming. And also, it's what God does with me. So that has been like one of the best learning experiences for me with my 12-year-old, is being able to like quickly switch to, remember, you're fully accepted. And we can work through that stuff in a few minutes. But like, if you want a hug right now, because I have that feeling sometimes where I'm like, I want to be like, fool, if you come at me, like, if it's going to get bad, if you keep talking to me like this, like, I'm going to lose my temper. But to have to like, I don't know, like access the Holy Spirit to be like, oh, God would immediately hear me if my heart turned towards him. That's going to be the same for us. Those are the types of things that have made the adventure super challenging, which I love a challenge, and really, really fulfilling and satisfying. And my whole identity, and I think this is easier for me than for moms who do stay at home. It's easier for my husband because men are generally not identified as fathers first. And it's easier for me because I have a career and a business that is really identified by me because I am the product. I don't identify first as a mom. And I don't identify like so much of my life as a mother, that to me, I'm like, I see my life when they're out of my house. Still, I see all of these things that I'm passionate about that do go beyond them, that I think the advantage is that, like, that helps me take it a little bit less seriously sometimes, or a little bit less personally, when they're just kids growing up. They, like, both of my boys are in a chubby phase, and they're going to grow out of it because they're going to hit puberty and they're going to get tall. They're already like wearing like size 9.5, 10 men's shoes. So like I can see that they're just in a phase. They can't see that, but I can look back at when I was 10 and I was in a chubby phase and I grew out of it, and now I'm back in it. But you know what I mean? Like life happens, but they all they need to know is like, life is hard sometimes, and it's going to be kind of tricky for a couple of years when kids are calling you big back and stuff like this. But you're going to get through it, and then you're going to be stronger. And so it's like, it's like a learning experience all the time, like right when you figure out what you're doing, they change phases. And then you're like, dang it, I finally figured out how to address that issue. And now they have a totally different issue. And that's like, because I'm a learner and because I like a challenge, it's been such a blast. Every day's not a blast, right? Like this is not something I have to tell moms, but every day is not always fun. But the whole experience taken as a whole is so fascinating. It's so interesting. Like they're little humans, like learning how to navigate a world that, by the way, like it's so different. I mean, my son is now the age that I was when our family got our actual like first computer. The internet wasn't even invented yet, Yeah. And so, yes, it's a very different world, but like the things that you see come and go, it's like, like Proverbs says, like there's really nothing new. I mean, yes, social media is new and AI is new and Momo or whatever is new, but like really the struggles they're having it's so interesting to see, like, these are the things all kids have gone through. Like when I was pregnant, I remember thinking, hey, Alia, millions of women have done this. That's not to say that it's easy or that our experiences are all the same, but like there's so many people who have done this, and you got this because they all did it too. And it's like that with every phase. It's like, my gosh, like we can just kind of look at each other from across the restaurant when my kids don't have phones yet and stuff, but like one of these days, if they prefer their phone over me, probably a mom and I are going to lock eyes across the restaurant and like, we'll both understand. Right. So that's kind of the fun of it too, is like, we're all kind of in this together. And the thing that makes me saddest about being a parent is that there's so many things nobody talks about, or people don't feel willing to be vulnerable about, or to say like, I don't know what I'm doing. Do you know what you're doing? I don't know what I'm doing. That's what community is for. And so we just kind of get together and like, don't know what we're doing together. Like, let's do more of that. Yeah. I do think that there are a lot of moms or people who are on social media kind of pretending to be experts, and like, you don't know what the rest of their house looks like, but on the other hand, the idea that you almost be put on your best face for something like social media, I think it does make, I mean, like, let's get real, like things like uterine prolapse, which when I went through mine, I realized like 1 in every 3 women experiences this. Why have I literally never heard of it? Right. So like, there's some things that just like, it's so common. Why don't we talk about it more? And we just don't, in our current society, have these like older sisters and mothers of the faith that will sit down and say like, well, at this point in my marriage, our sex life kind of got really boring. And like, here's what we did about it. We just don't talk about it enough because we're afraid to be vulnerable. And so many people think they're alone, and we're not. None of us are. We're all basically experiencing the same things. Your husband may not be a stay-at-home dad, but your dad still, like, I watch my husband with his boys, and I'm like, dang, it must be hard to be a father of boys that are coming into adolescence, because they're challenging you differently than they're challenging me. They're competing with you differently than they're like, I'm sure most dads of boys have probably gone through some of the same things, right?
Right. I appreciate that so much. I really love the recurring theme in our discussion today too, of adventure and embracing the flexibility, because you can't be so sure or so certain. You can have plans, but things can go a completely different way. And that's part of what makes it the adventure. And so I love that kept coming up in everything that you shared today. Alia, thank you for being a guest on the Motherhood Experience. I've appreciated it.
It's been so much fun. Thank you. It's just fun to get to talk together about things like this.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.